Greetings and welcome to yet another episode of the Greekspeek podcast. I'm the Arkon, creator of the show, with the Greek as my co-host. This is episode 9 of what is an almost completed series of 10 episodes. My apologies for the record-setting gap of time between this and the last episode. I had hoped to get my schedule on track and that things were going to slow down for me, but that did not happen. And so things have progressed as they have, but I do hope to still finish within the next few weeks with this. We only have one more left to go after this one, so I think we should be fine. The Greekspeak website and podcast continues to be run by me as a personal project with no commercial, religious, or political affiliations, and it will most likely stay that way until we're done. So that's it for the introduction. Please enjoy the rest of the show, and thanks again for listening. Hi there, Greek.
Greetings.
Hey, it's been a while since we last spoke. How have you been keeping yourself busy?
Sort of a while, I guess. Busy. I'm not sure if you really want to be busy in this world, but yeah.
Well, I guess to each his own. Some people need to have things to do, otherwise their idle hands fall into things that they shouldn't be doing. But yeah, we're going to focus on a new topic for this week. The last episode was politics and military, and I felt that the next topic should be about something equally pertinent to the structures that exert the most influence on the world. So I picked the economy and the legal society. Those are things that you've broached on before when talking about the credit system and your view on attorneys. So I think it's fitting to dig a little deeper into that, and we'll start with the economy, which I've divided into two segments, namely money and then banks and the credit system. So the word economy is widely defined as the production, distribution, and consumption of goods and services in society, but the end goal of a lot of that activity is often what people call money, which is, I think, a very curious and diversified artifact. It doesn't seem to have one meaning, although it's commonly touted as a means of exchange, but it's also described since ancient times as being connected to evil doing because of people's attraction to it. So I think there's more to unpack than just what academia or financial institutions choose to share with the public about that. So my first question is, Greek, what is money really? And additionally, what does it represent?
Okay. I would suggest that let's go back to the definition of economy. Nomos or nomi meaning law, and or ecos meaning house. So literally means it's taken from the Greek roots, two roots, eco and nomos, meaning law of the house. And if anyone has ever heard what we call Greekspeek, in the past, you might have been aware of interjection of a concept called the gods, or for most people's perceptions, it's probably where they would consider to get their religion, ethics, morality, etc. Higher order conscious things are within the realm of the divinity. The sense of the law of the house or economy ultimately stems from there. Which, of course, we're going to be talking about the legal system, which will also tie into that. But remember, before we even get to the legal system, that the legal pertains to law. It is not law in itself. So back to the what is money? Well, it is such a subjective feeling because, thoughts should be objective and feelings are always subjective, let's say. Um, I would suggest that people's subjectivity will always override any clear meaning to the term of what is money. But if one retracts themselves from the subjectivity and tries to, soar above the landscape and literally meaning a society living on the earth, terra firma, uses the goods and time and services and labor and productions and all these things that they do on the earth as part of their economy. So as you're on the earth, you tend to be fairly stationary within what you call where you live. But once you start traveling outside of that, you need a portable sense of your society that lives on the earth to be brought along with you and to be used as trade or exchange. But in essence, I've from Greekspeek point of view, money is portable land. That's why if you look at the lawful money concept or the lawful money uh, establishment is based on precious metals, which are extracted from the earth. At least, most people would suggest still that they are extracted from the earth. I would suggest that the concept of portable land will also carry over to the discussion on the legal system and what land and ownership and things like that are. Before we go into what money is, I just want to bring up a few things. This is basically like a nomenclature that could be used to objectify what you hear about money and the economy in your travels in this world. Gold and silver, well, are precious metals, and there are other things that are considered precious, like minerals as well, and things of rarity, treasure, art, and things like that. But the precious metal and the rare items and the precious minerals, and then we go down to the different aspects of what we mentioned as being economy and used for trade. But the gold was used by nobility and royalty. It was a storehouse of wealth. And it was basically used as a reserve. That's why when you read about, let's say, 19th century land purchases between the United States and Mexico and France and such, that was the established quote unquote ruling body or the government. They had put in the contract the exchanges would be made with silver, not gold. So you can look at that, how many millions or thousands of pieces of silver were used to make certain purchases of land between nations. Now, the gold is in the reserve of the nobility, but they do use silver in the market or to make exchanges. The silver also was used by the common man to make exchanges and consequently went both ways. Silver was used as a reserve and also gold by the common man. But typically the money was based on silver, whether it was a banknote or coinage or the value of things in monetary terms was in silver. And that would be for the working class, the middle class, if you want to go caste system of classes, pretty much was the silver base. The poor, the disenfranchised, meaning those that were not considered to have mobility in society, used barter. They used barter of goods usually. If I had a pound of potatoes and you had 2 pounds of corn, that was a fair trade. But if the corn wasn't doing well and the potatoes were, it might be 2 pounds of corn to 1 pound of potatoes. So the poor usually do barter. And then we have credit. The credit is reserved for the slave, usually. Usually, when you have a slave class, again in the caste system, they operate on a credit system. What I mean by that is, that's a very broad topic, but I just nailed it in a very narrow description and explanation by giving an example. When you were a slave and you were under a household, the master of the household might have been traveling, or he didn't do certain menial things or any of the menial things if he could afford slaves. And believe it or not, one of the menial chores or labors to do for the household or the estate was to go to the marketplace and what we call shopping today. To buy either any item that the estate would need, from food, clothing to supplies, various sundries. Well, guess what happened? The slave was called and given a list to go and purchase things at the market, and he did so with credit, using credit. They would have a signet, either a bronze plaque or some form of signet, meaning something that represented the house, and it would be rubbed on a piece of leather or parchment to make an impression, kind of like the old credit card devices were. So this credit aspect always went through the private ownership concept and the concept of exchanging debt. So I hope we went down from the gold as reserve, silver as the common currency. The poor use barter, and the slaves are in credit. So maybe that's a good place to start.
Yeah, so I think that there are a lot of things there too that will give us topics for further conversation, and that's cool. But I've heard you use that definition before, money is portable land, and I certainly see its application, especially when you expand on it like that. But if money is really just land, then why isn't fruit and weeds considered effective money? Why does it have to be precious metals? I don't know that we've gotten to the heart of what it's supposed to represent as an item that
Mm.
also has social and psychological effects. What you're saying is one aspect of it, but I sometimes feel like we need a broader understanding as well.
Well, the more valuable the substance, the less of it you need for an exchange with a comparably less valuable substance. So if money is portable land, gold would probably be, in a common sense, the most valuable thing you can carry. Yes, there might be other precious metals based on commodities and things, but let's say a kilogram of gold will buy you 100,000 kilos of wheat. The more valuable it is, I mean, it can get to the point where you have, let's say, a new substance that's even more valuable than gold, and a grain of rice, size piece of that metal can buy you 100,000 kilos of gold.
But we already know that
It's
there's
comparable.
stuff more valuable than gold. Like diamonds are considered more valuable than gold, so is platinum.
Well, that's the subjective aspect of it. Like diamonds were you won't see any advertisements or propaganda for diamond wedding rings until De Beers came into. And diamonds are not rare, by the way. You're taught to believe that they're rare. They're very common. That's one of the social conditioning things that you'll find as you go along any research path.
Okay. I hear you. Um, so I will make an attempt to push into the areas that I'm talking about, and if you see anything valid there, then maybe you can expand on that as well. I personally don't have a completely comprehensive definition for money yet, but from what I've been able to discern, I would add to what you're saying that money is also a representation of something, and it seems to be a representation of power, where power is not some indeterminate or bland word the way that the entertainment industry makes it out to be with, cartoons or superhero movies, but power meaning ability, more specifically, the ability to manifest your intentions, whether that's something industrial, social, destructive, edifying, or logistical, which is why someone like Bill Gates seems to be able to do anything he wants, but homeless people on the street are some of the most limited people in society. So, because the world agrees that money will be used to mediate almost everything, it becomes the most identifiable source of power that most people know of.
Well, it's not. It's only power until you run into someone that says it's not for sale. Then it puts a stop on that power. So what you do is you retract and you find people that you can influence with the money to go and do more of a, plans within plans, treachery within treachery against that which was not for sale. So you can acquire it, take it by force. You ever heard of a concept called a hitman or an assassin?
Indeed.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, force obviously when you have enough of it outranks most things as far as being able to affect your will. But this sort of social contract that exists in place today where things are not outright chaotic in most parts of the world and people have an order that they have acquiesced to, money is the means of greasing the wheels between most interactions. And that exists as the dominant form of hard power, second only to violence, which most people don't want to resort to.
Well, let's go back to the aspect when you have money and you equate that with power until you find into something or that you would like to have or acquire and it's not for sale by the person or the organization bearing it, then you resort to force. Okay, and well, you don't resort to force. You find those that will perform what you want them to perform for that money that you have, uh, and then you get your power that way. Uh, but it also has to do with the ideology. Like if you couldn't find people that were in let's say, savage or simple or materialistic to accept money to do anything, what you do is you start diminishing the culture, and you start breeding a new culture that will do that. And that's what you see in place today throughout the world.
But I mean, the people that are doing that, they don't lack for anything as far as being able to use force. I mean, that's a very sort of long-term, I think, plan for somebody that wants to engineer the world in a certain way. But anyway, we may still find a satisfactory definition, I think, moving forward. I'm certainly seeing what you're saying, but I still feel like there's a slightly missing component that we might stumble onto as we continue to talk about it.
Well,
Uh,
the missing component is the ideology of the society, meaning what form of law they have allegiance to and live to uphold. And so the first thing you have to do to take control of the economy is take control of the law, right? And then you subject the society to a changing law system, not legal system, but which is an ideology and what something you live by, and then you either eliminate those that don't want to go with it by many ways: disease, war, whatever, starvation, financial crashes. Right, you withdraw the money, and then you breed a new culture, just like you would domesticate a chicken, for example, or domesticate a farm animal. And at this time, what you experience is an education system, a history, a law form, a culture that is fairly new. It was revised and redone by what you call the 1950s on the Pope's work schedule. It started in the end of the 19th century. Anyone could go do some research on economic textbooks, not really textbooks, but economic commentary in the 19th century. There was many economic schools of thought and pertaining to various cultures. This is before the rise of communism and capitalism and such. You've already been over 200 years into the Industrial Revolution, which started in the 15 or 1600s. So you're looking at a social engineering that is now manifest, that began in earnest by the mid to late 19th century. It didn't take very long to redo the entire world. So when you look at culture changes, tradition, and law form changes, the concept of finance is understood. And also, it's very difficult for people to perceive it objectively because they've been raised in it. And their parents and grandparents also reinforce this new breeding program or social engineering. So there's no way they'll be able to see out of it if they're looking for approval from those around them.
all right, I understand that. Sort of the thing that I mentioned before about this other aspect of money that's been talked about since ancient times is that it's most notably appropriated from the Bible. Love of money is the root of all evil. Is there a rational reason that we can give for that? Is it because perhaps people seek power, perhaps above all else, and because they see money as representing that, they go for it?
Most people seek power with money. I've encountered certain individuals that live an extremely modest life, and almost to the point where they'd be living out of a trailer or a mobile home, and they're billionaires, and you wouldn't know it. And they shop. They never buy new clothes. They buy used clothes. They sort of look not well kept. Uh, so those are the exceptions. So it's not a rule that money is power. And again, you really don't need religious fanaticism, right? Can breed power or followers. That would go back to the Gustave Le Bon authorship of The Crowd, let's say, to understand power. But in essence, for this conversation, you're at the tail end of a 19th century social engineering platform, which pretty much gave up about 10 or 20 years ago, and now on a new social engineering platform, which will never really come into fruition, which is designed to go out to what's called 2050. Right. So I just threw in a whole bunch of stuff there. But without sounding too philosophical and being more empirical, perhaps maybe discussing how the money system works today that most people are not aware of.
Well, we're certainly going to get to that. Of course, we're not going to skip it. I just thought it was curious that, I mean, you've given these other examples of power mediums, but I don't see the ancient record saying that those things are the root of all evil. It is the love of money that is the root of all evil. So clearly there's something
Okay.
pertinent there.
Well, the love of the it's not money, but it's the love of money. So you can be poor, let's say, and have a love for money, or you could be wealthy and have a love for money. It's indiscriminate. It's just the love for money. It doesn't denote any kind of quantity or possession of. Ultimately, when you consider even lawful money, it's still a fiction. I'll give you an example. If everyone was able to produce gold, tangible, sellable, elemental gold in their kitchen, how much would it be worth?
Not very
Right.
much.
Right. So now the empirical, what's seeming empiricalness of gold becomes ephemeral. So it is a fiction. In other words, it's not absolute. But what is absolute is for a certain age, what is given as a moral and ethical and law standing in law. Uh, Gold is the storehouse of wealth, and until it is made more public or commonly known on how to produce it in mass, it stands. Is it possible to live in a society where there is no money? I think Bradbury showed us that in Star Trek, right? If everyone just did what they found they should do to upkeep, themselves in society and all that, and there was equal sharing, whether it was meritarious, based on merit or not, you wouldn't need money. Yeah, and just to interject, you don't. There is no money in society today at all. So, like you said earlier, there's no chaos. So the person who has a love for money in this society is a real sick individual, if you really consider that, because there is no money today in circulation or used.
Well, yes, in the strictest sense of following the definition, but that which money is used to achieve, I think, is perhaps more worthy of consideration than just the medium itself, which is ultimately just a rock, a precious metal. You're using that to achieve some kind of social gain or material gain, which is a far more interesting dynamic to analyze than the rock.
Okay, there is lawfulness, and then there is what is being done. And what is being done in the world society today is not lawful. So when we say something like money, that is rooted in lawfulness. When you compare it to the activities of the current society on the planet, it is unlawful. So it's very difficult to carry over, let's say, a thought or an explanation to an unlawful group, meaning it's okay. It's spontaneous. It's unpredictable in a sense, unless you know the future, and it's unstable and dangerous, right? So then, if you start looking at all the other things that if you're going to plan a society as it is today, you're going to have to put things in place called policing, right? Regulation and other things like that to control the volatility, potential volatility of a society that has no money but still engages in exchange. And to make it even worse, that they think there is money. The next step is you have to remove any kind of reference to anything lawful. So you introduce a legal system, you introduce attorneys, you eliminate any knowledge of history or science, right? And you eliminate education. You eliminate any kind of a spirituality that is edifying. You give them garden variety demonology, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, all these things. So they just play around. Satanism, same stuff. You form a society that, from a cosmic point of view, is actually worthless. Because it spends most of its time and intention engaging in worthlessness. With the small group of people that are behind the scenes, and when I say people, I don't necessarily mean human either, but people nonetheless that are in control of this planet. So that is basically it in a nutshell. And you can go off in any direction you want on all those things, meaning the military aspect, the industrial aspect, the education aspect, the science aspect, the religious aspect, and all that. And the underpinning element to all that is finances, because, most people want to do things and they need the financing to do it. So when you start discussing the financial element, and once you get outside of that, it's the lawfulness, in other words, it's not operating lawfully, it's a very, very open conversation because anything goes. In other words, any type of fraud or any type of scam that's acceptable becomes the norm.
Mm. All right. Well, like you suggested before, let's perhaps move on to the banks and the credit system, having looked at money. You said before that what we have today are not really banks, but some kind of financial institution. So perhaps we can start with historically, what is a bank?
Many ways to look at it, but for you had it was a proxy storage of wealth, meaning if you didn't want to store it within your estate or your personal or land that you had control over, you brought it to the bankers. All the way down, the bank being a physical place with physical money, meaning precious metals or notes representing that. All the way down to a bank meaning a table or for a money changer. People that traveled and they used a different rate system. So, in other words, if you had a coin that weighed a certain amount, you wanted for one country, you wanted to exchange it for the type of coins weighing whatever other amount for another country, so you can do the common exchange, in purchases. So that's basically what the banks were, basically to change money from one jurisdiction to another, or one culture from another, all the way also from the storage of holding someone's wealth, which would be either for personal reasons, for their family or estate, or for trade. And then you get into what's called the law of nations, which is in the U.S. Constitution, and the law merchant, which will probably cover a little bit about both ways with the economic and the legal discussion.
Okay, so I believe that the banks also had a religious component to them, going quite far back. You have clay tablets from 2000 BC that show that the earliest recorded accounts of banks were actually the temples. So, for example, the sun god of Babylon would lend, well, not the sun god, but the priests would lend money to the farmers in exchange for a portion of their yield and would be very demanding in collecting the interest. And so, that activity seems to have always been managed by a power base and not just some random part of the public.
Yeah, you could say that. Well, again, what was considered lawful money came from your gods, so of course.
And what can you share about how banking developed during the first and second millenniums? It seems that it was always something that was connected to certain ethnic groups or certain races or even certain countries like Italy or Austria after a certain point. How did that industry find itself being centralized around very specific groups and regions?
It There was a division that happened around that time between the Eastern and the Western world, as you can always see references to such even today, the East and the West. So we can discuss it either way, but there that bipolar existence in the world that still exists, East or West, is simply the way to describe it. The East always had more of a xenophobic, uh, isolationist, and the West had a more expansive view on the world. Uh, you could look at the colonization of the continent of Africa by the Dutch, for example, as one essence of expansion, where you don't see colonization of the Sino culture or the Chinese culture or the Asian culture beyond that area. Um, so I would just say that it's not a phenomenon or anything. It just is the way the West expanded, and it also has borrowed more from the East, meaning the Persian, Farsi, or what you call modern day Iran, many or Arabic, even what Persians and Farsi are not Arabic, but also from the Arabic concept and the Judeo concept of finance, and of course brought to Europe. and mixed in with their ideology there. So it has a reputation for being a central point because of the presumed Christian era that you're living in right now. It's from a secular point of view. This is the Christian era, and it harkens back, of course, to the Vatican and all that. So I don't see it much as a phenomenon or a change of anything, other than more of a worldwide standardization.
It does extend into the East, though, given that it is a worldwide thing. So it's
Right.
not like you have these two separate systems of banking or finance in the East and the West, as far as I can tell.
The ideologies are different, but the Babylonian system extended to the East as well, which is you're not supposed to know about. In other words, you only know about recent phenomena, recent historical occurrences. Like I mentioned earlier, you're not allowed to know the real history of man, of civilization, how things change. You only know for most people the past 2 weeks, but generally academically, you don't go back more than a few years, and then the rest of it's all a lie, going back, however far. That's commonly accepted history. But the world standardization happened with the Egyptians. That's well known, with artifacts found even in Australia, where there was an Egyptian system. There's a well-known established facts that artifacts of Babylonian weights and measures and money are found in places in South America and Colombia during the Babylonian period. Early Iron Age, let's say, for example. This standardization basically at what focal point, and now it tends to be the IMF out of Washington, D.C., and the Bank of London in England, or City of London. So these things change somewhat.
Hmm. And so banks and economies, they underwent an enduring change in the 20th century with the spread of central banks and fiat currency and centralized authorities for governing global finance. And a lot of people in the alt media will point to the Federal Reserve or Bank for International Settlements or IMF or blah, blah, blah as the culprits of some nefarious global agenda that has orchestrated that. But usually they can't name real names other than the usual suspects of certain families that are the guilty parties. What more accurately can be said about how this thing evolved in the 20th century?
Well, it was tried out in earnest in the 19th century. From the beginning of the 19th century, for example, Canada was experimented on with a Federal Reserve type system in the late 1800s before they put it in place in America. Now, when you say fiat currency, it's fiat in operation because it's not really a bank note, but it's not fiat. All of the banknotes today, because they're called fiat, in other words, you can't get anything for them, are not fiat. They're actually backed by, they actually represent a lien on the people, the land, the birds, the trees, all the legal artifacts, meaning whatever can be described on paper. All of the banknotes represent a lien by the central bank on the government and the people of that country. So they're not really fiat. They're actually backed up. Like, for example, if the United States or Spain, or even though they're part of the EU, or any other country wanted to bring in lawful money, they couldn't because they have nothing to back it with, you see. So it's fiat in operation, but in essence, it's backed up by what you hear bankers saying all the time. It's not backed up by anything but the faith of the people. What's faith? It goes into the religious topic, just like we'll show later how the legal system is a religion also. And I mean that literally, not figuratively, from a fanatic sense.
All right, I hear you. But pertaining to still, though, the developments that took place that put in place the current credit system, from what I understand, is that you had a series of events that took place in the 30s around that
Okay.
time. Can we talk about
Yeah,
that?
let's just show a very simple way in how it's done. Based on how most countries are set up, it doesn't matter what the type of system that's in place, monarchy, communism, capitalism, whatever. Uh, they were either convinced, or what was put in place was to go into a contract with a private bank or banking cartel known as central banks. So what they did was they go into a contract. They usually amend their constitution or whatever form of government documents that they have to allow this to happen. By legislation, let's say, or by decree. And once this happens, instead of the government itself being in control of the money, hands over all the tasks and responsibilities to this private banking cartel, which is always disguised as, using the country's name and but always being a central bank. The central bank is the giveaway. Uh, so what happens is the central banking system starts to go about all the business of producing and distributing money like a government would, but for a fee. But every time it does a form of production or financial activity, it requires something tangible from that particular government. And when the government runs out of everything tangible, then that central bank by contract puts that government into bankruptcy because the fees are still owed. Okay. An example here in the United States would be the Federal Reserve Act comes into play and they produce all the financial requirements for the government at a rate of 6%. And all the financial activities require, gold deposits and deposits of deeds and, tangible items, meaning land titles and things like that. So what happens is if, as time seemingly in perpetuity, as time keeps going on and on and on, the government runs out of things to give the private bank, the Federal Reserve, to monetize or produce in financial products in the economy, whether it's banknotes or coin or whatever. But the government still requires these financial activities to carry on. But the Federal Reserve won't work for free, right? They work at a rate of 6%. So what happens is the government says to the Federal Reserve, I need money for this year's economy, and the Federal Reserve is, well, you have nothing else to give me. Well, that's because the government says because we've given you everything. Well, that's too bad. It's not my problem. And by the way, if you have nothing else to give us, you still owe us 6%. Plus, you need to still keep operating the next month, year, 10 years, or whatever. So what do we do? So what they do is the government goes into bankruptcy. It's already been incorporated because a non-incorporated government cannot go into contract with a private entity, by the way. I hope I haven't lost anyone until this point. By the way, there's not an economics professor or academic idiot that knows any of this, but you could look it up yourself, even if you're 8 years old. So what happens is they go through this elaborate but yet quiet bankruptcy, which instead of shutting down the government in bankruptcy, they put it in what's called receivership. And if anyone knows what receivership in bankruptcy is, you can see things try to remain as the same as possible. So when an entity, a corporation or organization goes into bankruptcy and receivership, you try to change as little as possible. All that means is that the creditor, meaning the central bank, now owns the government, but keeps it operating because it's a fixture in society that society shouldn't do without. And that's pretty much it. And that's how it works in the American system, in the European system, in the Asian system as well. And basically, the main commodity is the human. It's called human resources, or however you want to look at it. Basically, you're living as a slave, but not understandable in the way that you've been taught what a slave is. But legally, you are a slave, a quote unquote citizen. As a matter of fact, you could look at the 14th Amendment. They kind of spell it out in the U.S. Constitution. It says there will be no more slavery, just U.S. citizens. I mean, it's used in the same sentence. So that's pretty much how all the systems work. It's kind of like the stuff you see in the entertainment system with Hollywood. When you start dealing with the mafia, a businessman needs some money to run his business or expand, and he deals with the mafia, and by the end of the film, he loses the business to the mafia or organized crime. It's the same story with the financial system.
All right, so we're looking at a global bankruptcy of multiple nations that took place somewhere around the 30s, 40s-ish, and yet there's hardly any paperwork on this. I mean, there's a guy called Rod Class, who's the only one that I know of that does comprehensive talks about that, but he's also tangled himself up in the US legal system so he can fight his own court case and prove a point to his patriot social circle, so he doesn't reach that far. But other than that, there's not really much else to access directly about this.
Congressional record. You could do. I'm sure there's plenty of people out there that have gathered congressional records regarding commentary with Congress, which Congress, by the way, in America was shut down in the 1860s. So, I mean, they just show up as actors now. Civil War was not the Civil War. You typically have a revolution or a civil war or a severe depression. And all of this, by the way, has a very strong spiritual component to it. If you understand what's called human inspiration, literally. In other words, there's a non-tangible component behind all of this, and you see it constantly in the language, the banking, the financial language, and also the legal language.
And also in the symbolism, most people will always point to the all-seeing eye on the dollar bill or something of that nature. Okay, so let's look at how today's economy actually functions. Professors and bankers will talk about things like GDP and loans and stocks and interest rates and taxes, but what are the principal determinants of how money slash credits move around, who gets first dibs on accessing them, etc., etc.?
Yeah, see, okay, everything is in receivership, meaning you have a small cartel that runs and owns everything by presumption. That's why, for example, when people get an IRS lien, it says notice of lien. Well, they don't need to provide a lien because there's a presumption that everything is under a lien, and you just got them upset. So now they're saying that we don't presume that you have a lien on you, but you see, so it's all by presumption. Uh, the 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 backbone to all of that is understanding the different, like you said, who gets first dibs on it, the different levels, the different tiers. Like you have the primary market, which is how the credit is created. For example, every time you sign a piece of paper, that piece of paper, or now it's digital, gets monetized. That's primary. Then you have the secondary market, which is the servicers or the debt collectors or the banks that the part of the bank that does deposits and things like that and checks. Well, actually, check is part of the primary, but anything that you sign is primary. The debt collectors and all the legal, the attorneys, all that stuff is secondary market. Now, and then there's a tertiary market, which is kind of like the entertainment business, you know, where they promote all of these things. One thing to comprehend is when you're going to put a new system in a society, it doesn't matter what it is, religious, technical, financial, or whatever, you have to make sure that a good portion or enough of a portion, which could be only 2 or 3% in some cases, of the society relies on your system as for its livelihood. In other words, a government job. For example, the more government employees there are, the weaker the nation or society is. Because, for example, if the government starts to become quote unquote evil, uh, very few people are going to quit their job. They're going to continue working and they're going to yell out and scream, "What do you want me to do? This is my living," right? You see? So the secondary market, the debt collectors and the attorneys and all that get involved with finances, are there to uphold plausibility because people are still going on the ancient notion that if you borrow money, you have to pay it back. And when you start explaining that they actually just monetize your signature and you're the one providing the credit, you're the creditor, not the debtor, but they switch you in a contract that now you're the debtor, they can't understand that. It's called the 800-pound gorilla in the room that no one sees. That's a whole concept of, I like to put forward the term cosmic censorship. It doesn't matter what's in the room if they're blocked from seeing it. It doesn't matter what it is, how big or how small. So the secondary market, the debt collectors and all that, like for example, if someone gets a $10,000 loan, let's just use the regular slave parlance, they're finished. They actually provided at least $80,000 for the bank just with signing because it's a 10-to-1, right? So they provided $90,000 and the bank has to keep 10% in reserve. So, it's basically the creation of modern money mechanics of Federal Reserve Chicago Federal Reserve Bank out of Chicago, modern money mechanics. I once had an economics professor say, "Oh, that's a fake document," even though the Federal Reserve puts it out. So basically, the secondary market's there to maintain plausibility. That's where your the main backbone, meaning the millions and millions of people that rely on this system and will not question it, because that's how they get their quote unquote paycheck. You see, so the most important aspect of it is not really that there is a small cartel or of people that have usurped the money system of the whole world. The main component is the 2%, 3%, 4%, 5% of the population that works in the legal field and in the financial field. That's all the secondary market. They actually are a proxy army for this private banking system. For example, everyone knows someone, right, that works in the financial system or the legal system or the government, right? So you don't want to see them lose their job, do you? What kind of a person would want that? Right. So and the more people that work for the government or the financial system or the legal system, the weaker the society gets, with this type of system. And that's the secondary market.
You mentioned a bit about, cosmic censorship and the fact that people cannot understand certain concepts, and I find that people don't seem to grasp really the difference between credit and debt, and even in the elite classes of people that claim to be experts in this area, whether it's people that run shows on money or the economy or it's politicians, they don't really seem to acknowledge that it's a credit-based economy, and they talk a lot about debt. Can you differentiate between credit and debt and parse that a little bit?
Sure, that goes into the legal system. It's all wordplay. Short of being a boy and signing a contract that you're a girl, right? Anything else is possible. Even that's possible now. So what happens is you sign a piece of paper and it's monetized, right? In other words, the bank has nothing. It's just a storefront, or it could be digital. All it has in its inventory are transaction numbers, preset transaction numbers. A certain number of transaction numbers are given to each bank, and they're just sitting there. And the moment someone that can sign their name or give an autograph or a mark, a transaction number is brought up and the details are filled in. This person came in for a loan for $10,000. Did they sign it? Yes. Okay. Next to the transaction number, $10,000 appears, and everybody's okay. But we can't do this for everyone all the time, because people will say, well, I don't have a job. I don't want a job. I'll just go sign my name and get $10,000 a week, right? And then nothing will ever get done in society. So you have to maintain plausibility. So then within the contract that they sign, or for getting the $10,000, it says that for the loan that I have received, you actually lie. They lie and you swear to it, right? If you look at any mortgage or anything, it says for the loan that I received, I will pay back, right? So this document creates the conditions, and anything before that document will never be looked at by the jurisprudence or the jurisdictions if it's ever comes up for arbitration. It can't, because the whole system is based on that. The last thing you want is these patriotic idiots to realize that their government sold them down the river and doesn't exist anymore. Meaning the government doesn't exist in the way that they think it does, right? So you can't for normalcy, you have to start turning princes into frogs on paper.
Yes, I follow you. But let's not forget to differentiate between credit and debt, though.
Well, the credit is created when you sign and it's monetized, but then it becomes debt when you sign a contract saying for a loan you received, you're now a debtor, but you never received a loan. You're the one that actually financed it. It would be like going to a coffee shop and buying a coffee, and the moment you sit down, before you take a sip from it, they take it from you and they give it to the next patron who pays for it, the same coffee. And then if you say, well, I want coffee, well, you have to buy another one. How dare you want to drink the coffee you just bought?
Okay, I follow you. But this thing is interesting though, where you say that the bank has nothing, and it's just a holder of these transaction numbers. But then by that sort of understanding, let's say you and I decide to create a bank, we get rich today. We don't need any to hold anything.
Well, the bank is a national association. Like you could name any bank, Citibank, J.P. Morgan, um, Wells Fargo, whatever, Deutsche Bank, go on and on and on, right? Rabobank. What those are national associations. And national associations like the Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, Sierra Club, environmental groups, right? And they're NGOs, non-government organizations, but they have cage codes, which is a corporate and government entity code. Okay, so the reason why the banks are wealthy is not because they're running as a bank, it's because they set up a corporation. You can see this if you do business with banks. Let's say you do business with Bank of America. There's Bank the of America NA, which is National Association. Then there's Bank of America Trust. Then there's Bank of America Inc. Incorporated. There's Bank of America this, right? So they use the same name to create different entities, which they pile and dump the funds if they can into it, or have people buy shares and things like that. It's the same thing you see in religion. Is it a black Jesus? Is it a white bleeding heart Jesus? Is it a Jesus that you go to hell if you don't believe in? Is it a Jesus that is this, or which one? Which Jesus are you talking about? Which Buddha are you talking about? This is all based on fanaticism and religious underpinnings, all of it.
I remember at one point when I was in Chicago, and I think they have it in other cities as well. You walk past a certain building and they have this big national debt number that's in the several billions. So this is just a joke?
No, the debt is actually the government's debt, but the government convinces you to pay their debt. It's kind of like you get a handful of bills at the end of the month and you go convince a stranger to pay them for you. I mean, and they keep doing it. And you get used to that. And then when they don't want to do it anymore, you want to kill them. That's what's going on today. Also, when the new banking system is put in place, this banking system, everyone that lives in the land that you have given over to the banks is your enemy. Right? Like in America, they have the Trading with the Enemies Act. Various other countries, they call it hostilities, belligerence, this and that. They're talking about you, right? Because if the people of any given government find out what the government did, not is and is doing, they would clean it out right away. But they don't. But the government preempts that by declaring them the enemy, and the people don't know that they are the enemy. So when you hear, whether it's from military, industrial, or television, or media, or government, whenever they talk about the enemy, they're talking about you. That's why I mean you're witnessing the decline of the society, and the plans to create a new breeding program, where there is no male or female, and you have cybernetic, people that are part machine, and the rest are just drugged, and then you have another group of people which are used for food, cannibalism, and this plan to create a new society by the 2050s, just like in the 1890s, they wanted a new society by the 1950s, right? You see, but you're in decline because it won't come into fruition.
Mm. Last thing on the subject of banks and credit systems, it does seem to be the case that a lot of activity centers around certain places like Switzerland and Luxembourg. Do you know why that is?
Well, because these things are like Switzerland and Luxembourg and places like that, even places in Holland, The Hague, that is strategic. It's not an accident. In other words, it's strategically set up that way. And they're not, a sense of neutrality. That's like the hub of evil, for example, right? Like everyone looks at Switzerland as being, oh yeah, they're neutral, they're peaceful, they're great. No, they're actually probably one of the most evil groups on the planet, right? In terms of what good, if you're going to go down the road of good and evil, right? Good being beneficial and evil being non-beneficial. So, no, that is a strategic location. Babylon was a neutral place in the ancient world.
Really?
Yeah.
Is that how so?
Well, it ran the world through satellites. Whenever you see a group going out and conquering, their home base is always neutral. Yeah, even Rome was neutral. Even though Caesar sat there, it was considered separate from anything else. Like all the roads lead to Rome. Well, why would that be so?
If my memory serves me right, there was a few occasions where Rome was invaded by foreigners who identified it as the hub of the activity that they had to go and cut down. So the enemies didn't view it as neutral.
Sure, but if you look at Switzerland, Switzerland in 2002 or so was cut down also, right? Economically, they became a sovereign state, right? I think Dmitry Kalasov talks about that in one of his YouTube videos. In other words, they became a corporation and fell into the rest of the group because there was no need for them to be neutral. And also, the more people became educated, then they would start focusing on it. So they made a cover for it by destroying Switzerland in its legal state. They changed its legal standing into, a schmuck country like the rest of the world.
Okay, so let's look at the last topic for the episode, which is how the legal system works. So firstly, we have a group of gatekeepers that mediate between the legal authorities and the public, who are called lawyers and attorneys, but you've remarked on how those two groups are not the same. So can you differentiate between them, lawyers and attorneys?
Well, a lawyer was always known as someone learned in the law. An attorney was someone that was used by a feudal lord to interact with his the fiefdom, the fiefdom, the serf or the slave. And there's no going around that. But what happens is because everyone is an attorney now, meaning that deals with the legal system, people have forgotten that what an attorney really is or really does. And because it's normal, it's normal. In other words, there's nothing alarming about an attorney, right? But an attorney is there for representing legal fictions, corporations, or serfs and slaves or incompetent people. And that harkens back to what I started off early in the Sonic event. This is a slave system. So why would you have people that are learned in the law, or why would you be learned in the law if you're a slave and you have a credit-based system? If you proclaim and try to exercise a knowledge of being learned in the law, you'll be punished for it because it goes against the norm. It's just like thinking, imagine it was normal for all the people, or 99.99999% of all the people in all the countries, all the nations, all the corporations, whatever, were all cannibalistic. And you started saying, well, cannibalism is wrong. You'll be promptly locked up and well, you'll be laughed at, and then you'll have ad hominem attacks against your person, and then you'll be sequestered from the group or eliminated with extreme prejudice. The same thing with the attorneys. If the entire planet is based on a credit system and people are legally enslaved, meaning they're chattel and they're issued a serial number and they're treated as property and charged with crimes and things like that, to say that attorneys are not good or whatever, any criticism against them is viewed as irrational. And it is actually. Think about it. It would be irrational to negatively criticize attorneys if it's already been well understood, rationalized, and established that everyone is pretty much a slave. All humans are slaves, except for very small enclaves on the planet. Why would you criticize attorneys? What are you, stupid or something? Don't you know that you're just a slave? Right? You're operating in a credit system. Why would you? Of course, it's natural to have attorneys, right? You see the point?
Yes, of course. To shift a bit away from the attorneys, which I think are a bit like a lower level of the rung, let's look at the lawyers a bit. What are the first historical accounts of those people coming onto the scene? Where did they come from? And were they always considered to be malevolent from the start?
No, the original lawyers, the original doctors, the original professors were the priesthood. The original banks and the original universities and government buildings were the temples, right? So as these things grew and expanded, and you had annexes, right? If you had, for example, as we said, the temple being the base for the noble things in society, if that society expanded and became an empire, there's only one temple, but you're going to make annexes of that temple, another, along your empire. So then you, in a diminished sense, have a lower priest. He's not a priest, but he knows everything a priest should know. Can you call him a priest if he's not a priest? No, you call him a representative of the priest. whether it's a matter of knowledge, whether, basic education, history, money, health, medical, whatever. You had people representing that priesthood throughout the empire or throughout the land. But they weren't the priests, so they became the doctors, which means teacher, or the attorney, which is the representative. Usually the attorney worked from the bottom up, not from the top down. In other words, his authority came from the top down, but he worked from the bottom up. He brought the unwashed masses to the hierarchy.
Oh, I see. I didn't know that.
Right. That's why you have to get an attorney to represent yourself. When someone tells you to get an attorney representative, it means he's telling you nothing but a serf or a slave, and you can't stand in front of the lords or the master.
Okay.
That's why they don't like. Here's the interesting thing: like today, even today in the courts, they're all sham courts anyway. But all of them, by the way, because if you try to have a real court, it would be closed down by fire or extreme prejudice. The aspect of representing yourself, they don't like that, because if you're capable and learned in the law, you wouldn't be wasting their time, because you would know already that you shouldn't be in that court. You get it? They only want people that are represented by attorneys, because if you're going to go in there as yourself, you're learning the law. Well, if you're so learned in the law and you're going in there as yourself, you should have avoided the entire matter from the beginning, which I've talked about before. You do that by going through the administration, not the judicial or the justice court, which is a sham or a religion or whatever you want to call it, based on the justice religion, the female goddess. I think I've talked about ad nausea for years now. To be forced into a justice court is actually religious oppression. They don't know that, and they would laugh at you if you brought that up. But actually, if they're laughing at you, you're dealing with those that are really too low on the rung, on the ladder. You need to go up higher, and they know exactly what's going on. So yeah, all of this stuff has a religious underpinning to it.
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have enough time to dig into the religious underpinnings, but that is always something that people can look into. It's things that I think we might have mentioned at some point in earlier streams also. Um,
You won't find much on the justice system being based on the goddess religion in what they call the search engines. You're going to have to find some stuff that's printed from 19th century or before, and you're going to have to open your eyes and look at all the symbolism, just like who was it, Confucius say, right, ancient Chinese secret, the symbols are the great communicators in a society, not words but symbols. And he wasn't talking about the pictographic nature of the Chinese writing system. He was talking about the what is hidden is revealed through symbolism.
yeah, I think that there's a general sentiment of that being the case now in the mainstream. I think people generally know that, but they don't seem to know what the symbols mean, and so they speculate, and all kinds of rumors abound. So, in this society where the imperative of the legal system is to maintain the order on behalf of these nameless patrons of the corporate state, can it be said that crime actually pays, since what we have is really just criminals judging other criminals?
Sure, but the thing is, the real criminals are the ones judging the people that are presumed to be criminals. In a factual, lawful sense, the entire society is criminal society. So if everyone is criminal, are there any criminals? No. So now you've turned everything over to a new paradigm now. Well, because meaning it's kind of like with the police. There are no good police. The reason why there are no good police is because those that are deemed good know about the bad police and don't do anything about it. So they're accomplices, you see. And by the way, the police are a function of the banks. We've talked about that. Lawful societies don't have police. Only the ones that are bankrupt or where allow private banks to come in and basically mortgage up everything, right? I'm not against the police because I have no interest. I'm not against anything that they're doing on this planet because it's all bad. So I can't say that I'm against any specific aspect of anything in this society. I'm against all of it from A to Z, from young to old, from high to low, because it's all unlawful, like we just said. So I just retract, and I can just give an educated opinion with references and an objective report. Um, like I've said many times, if everyone wants to band together and hold hands and make the world a paradise, I'm still going to be as separate from them as possible. If they all want to band together and create a living hell on earth, I'm still going to stay separate from them. Either way, whatever they do in the state that they're in, right? So this is the intention of these sonic events is to give an objective report and a quote unquote opinion with references, but at the same time to remain set apart from it and indifferent to it. So again, what they're doing with the attorney, just to go back, because everyone is acting in a criminal sense or supporting it, the attorneys are just there to monetize charges, from traffic tickets to court cases. All those numbers, all those things are monetized. In other words, they're deposited into the bank for credit, and there's nothing you can do about it. To some degree, in other words, there's no way to fix it. It has to be redone, and it is. I mean, the destruction of man's society is done by the quote unquote good guys, not the bad guys. The bad guys are the ones who are running it.
Mm. Do you know what Shakespeare was talking about when he wrote, "The first thing we do is kill all the lawyers" in that Henry VI play?
Yeah, that's a conversation between two of the characters, and there's more detail than just kill all the lawyers.
Well, yeah, I know, but I'm just
Yeah.
referring to the quote.
Well, yeah, that's something that has to be read in context. There's a Wolf Hill or something. There is a PBS series, a Wolf Hall or something, about an attorney for the king. That's a good series to watch. It's about one of the head attorneys there and the treachery and the lying that he did, and the feigning of power to maintain the British monarchy or the English monarchy during that time.
I believe it was Thomas Cromwell.
Yes, based on him, his life. And there's several of those Cromwells. It's the original one. It's a pretty good series to watch. It's on PBS. I'm not promoting it, but it's just it's like watching something. You can reference most of the things that they show, but it's in real life. It's like watching a film. Like most Christians know about the Bible by watching Walt Disney or the movies that they made. It's incorrect, obviously, all of it, right? None of it's correct, but at least you get a flavor for it. The time period and the certain things that were said.
All right. Well, then I think it's something that could be useful for people to check out if they feel so inclined. But I think that we're going to have to bring the conversation to a close. We've been talking for over an hour, and I think we've given people a lot of good things to mull over. So, unless you have something that you want to reiterate or emphasize, Greek, I think I'm good.
Not at all. I mean, well, what is there to emphasize but to de-emphasize what people think is true, really? And this last conversation or sonic event with the economy and the legal system is too broad to even get into, other than giving half-hearted opinions like I did pretty much. Hopefully I gave it with enough reference and some kind of flavor that people can go and look up certain things. But with that said, yeah, that's it for now, I guess.
All right. Well, then I think we'll end things off on that note. It's been a good stream, and we'll be returning at some point in the near future for the last episode of the Greekspeek podcast series. Sorry again for the long waiting time, but we only have one more left to go, and we will see you next time. So thanks again for listening.